The stagecoach driver delivered the news with all the warmth of a January blizzard, his weathered face showing not a flicker of remorse as he told Natalie Jensen that the freight company had lost every single one of her belongings somewhere between St. Louis and Council Bluffs, Iowa. Standing in the dusty street on that scorching July afternoon in 1868, with nothing but the worn traveling dress on her back and the small reticule clutched in her trembling hands, she felt the foundation of her carefully planned new life crumble like dried earth. Lost? The word came out barely above a whisper. But that was everything I owned. My clothes, my grandmother's quilts, my teaching supplies, the books I brought for the school children, everything. The driver spat tobacco juice into the dirt, already turning away. Company will investigate, miss. File a claim at the office. Might take a few months. A few months? Natalie's voice rose despite her best efforts to maintain composure. I start teaching in 3 days. I have nothing. No clothes to wear, no supplies for my students, nothing to furnish the small room I've rented. But the driver had already climbed back onto his perch, slapping the reins against the horses' backs. The stagecoach rumbled away, leaving Natalie standing alone in the middle of Main Street with $23 to her name and the sinking realization that her adventure west had just become a disaster. At 22 years old, she'd been so certain this was her destiny, so convinced that leaving Philadelphia to teach in a frontier town would fulfill the restless longing in her heart. Now she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. The July sun beat down mercilessly, and sweat trickled down her spine beneath the heavy wool dress that had been appropriate for travel, but was suffocating in the Iowa summer heat. Around her, Council Bluffs bustled with activity. Wagons loaded with supplies headed toward the Missouri River landing. Cowboys rode past, their spurs jingling. Women in calico dresses hurried along the wooden sidewalks with baskets over their arms. Everyone had somewhere to be, something to do, a place they belonged, everyone except her. Natalie forced herself to move, walking toward the small boarding house where she had arranged to rent a room. Mrs. Patterson, the landlady, was a stern woman with sharp eyes who had made it clear that payment was expected promptly every week. The room was tiny, containing only an iron bedstead with a thin mattress, a washstand with a chipped basin, and a single wooden chair. No curtains on the window, no linens on the bed, not even a towel. With her belongings, Natalie had planned to make it comfortable, homey. Now it looked like exactly what it was, a place for transients with nowhere else to go. She sank onto the bare mattress, fighting back tears that would accomplish nothing. Her grandmother's quilts were gone, the beautiful hand-stitched patterns that had taken years to create, that had been meant to comfort Natalie in this strange new place and remind her of home. The practical dresses she had sewn herself, the sturdy shoes, the warm shawl, the books of poetry, the daguerreotype of her parents, all vanished. Even the teaching materials she had spent the last of her savings on in St. Louis, the slates and chalk and primers she had purchased specifically for her students, were lost somewhere in the vast expanse between there and here. A knock on the door startled her from her spiraling thoughts. Mrs. Patterson stood in the hallway, her expression as unwelcoming as ever. "Supper is at 6 o'clock sharp. You miss it, you go hungry until breakfast, and the weekly rent is due every Monday morning, no exceptions." "Yes, madam, I understand." Natalie straightened her shoulders, determined not to show weakness. "Mrs. Patterson, I wonder if you might know where I could purchase some basic necessities. The freight company has lost my belongings, and I need to acquire a few things before I begin teaching on Monday." The landlady's eyes narrowed. "The Mercantile is down the street, Hendricks's Dry Goods. But I'll tell you now, nothing in this town comes cheap. If you cannot pay your rent, I'll need to know immediately so I can offer the room to someone else." "I will pay my rent." Natalie kept her voice steady despite the anxiety clawing at her chest. "Thank you for the information." After Mrs. Patterson left, Natalie counted her money again, as if the coins might have multiplied. $23. The room cost $2 per week. She needed to eat. She needed at least one other dress, undergarments, a nightgown, shoes that did not have holes forming in the soles, linens for the bed, basic toiletries. And she needed some teaching supplies, even if they were not as comprehensive as what she had lost. The mathematics were brutal. Even living as frugally as possible, her money would not stretch far enough. She had no family to write to for help. Her parents had died of cholera when she was 12, and her grandmother, who had raised her after that, had passed 2 years ago. That was why Natalie had been free to come west, why she had been so eager to start fresh somewhere new. There was nothing left for her in Philadelphia except memories and the small apartment she had shared with 3 other women, all of them scraping by on whatever work they could find. Teaching had been her dream, and when the position in Council Bluffs had been advertised, it had seemed like providence. The frontier needed teachers, and she needed a purpose. Natalie splashed tepid water on her face from the basin, pinned up the dark brown hair that had come loose during her journey, and headed downstairs. If she was going to survive this, she needed to assess her situation clearly and make a plan. Self-pity would not clothe her or feed her or equip her classroom. The mercantile was well stocked, but, as Mrs. Patterson had warned, expensive. Natalie fingered the fabric bolts longingly, calculating how much material she would need for even one simple dress, adding the cost of thread and buttons. Too much. A ready-made dress on display near the counter bore a price tag that made her stomach sink. She selected only the absolute necessities: a bar of soap, a small towel, a tin cup and plate, a single set of undergarments. The pile looked pathetic on the counter. "That everything, miss?" The clerk, a young man with a friendly face, began tallying the items. "For now, yes." Natalie kept her voice bright, refusing to be embarrassed. "I will return when I receive my first month's salary." She was counting out coins when the door opened behind her, bringing with it a gust of hot air and the sound of heavy boots on the wooden floor. The clerk's face transformed, breaking into a genuine grin. "Ryder, did not expect to see you in town today. Thought you would be up in the mountains until fall." "Needed supplies. Got a problem with some wolves getting too bold near the trap lines." The voice was deep, rough-edged, with the cadence of someone who spent more time alone than in conversation. Natalie did not turn around, focused on gathering her meager purchases, but she could not help being aware of the presence behind her. There was something about him that seemed to fill the small mercantile, a sense of contained power that made the air feel charged. "Heard you brought in near 100 pelts last season," the clerk continued. "That true?" 143. A low whistle. "That's a fortune. You planning to buy up half my inventory?" "Just what I came for. And I need some fabric. Good sturdy cotton, maybe 10 yards, and thread, buttons, whatever goes with making a shirt." There was a pause, and Natalie felt, rather than saw the man behind her shift his weight. "Hell, I do not know anything about sewing. Just give me what someone would need to make a couple of work shirts." "You taking up needlework in your spare time?" The clerk's voice was full of good-natured teasing. "Found a woman living rough up in the hills. She is from one of the wagon trains that got hit by sickness last month. Lost her husband and son, nearly died herself. She is recovering, but she has nothing, and her clothes are falling apart. Figured I would bring her some material so she could make herself something decent to wear when she is strong enough to travel down to her sister in Omaha." Natalie's hands stilled on her packages. She turned despite herself, curiosity overcoming her intention to remain invisible. The man standing 3 feet behind her was unlike anyone she had ever seen in Philadelphia. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they strained against his buckskin shirt. His arms were thick with muscle, visible where the sleeves were rolled back to reveal sun-bronzed skin. Dark brown hair fell past his collar, looking like it had been trimmed with a hunting knife rather than scissors. A beard covered the lower half of his face, but it could not hide the strong jaw or the sharp cheekbones. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, a startling light gray, like storm clouds, set in a face weathered by sun and wind and solitude. He looked dangerous and capable, and completely out of place inside the tidy mercantile. Those gray eyes met hers for just a moment, a brief acknowledgement of her presence before returning to the clerk. Natalie felt heat rise in her cheeks and quickly turned back to her purchases, annoyed with herself for staring. "That is real decent of you, Ryder," the clerk said. "I will put together what she needs. You want it on your account?" "No, I will pay now, and add in a pair of those women's boots. Size looks about." There was a pause. "Hell, I do not know. Medium? She is not a big woman. And throw in some wool stockings and whatever else a lady needs, undergarments or whatever. Have your wife pick them out. I will pay for it all." Natalie gathered her packages and moved toward the door, not wanting to eavesdrop further, but the mercantile was small, and she could not help hearing the exchange. This mountain man, this rough stranger who looked like he could break a man in half with his bare hands, was outfitting a complete stranger with everything she needed because he had found her in desperate circumstances. The kindness of it, the casual generosity, made her throat tight. Outside, the afternoon heat wrapped around her like a blanket. She walked slowly back to the boarding house, her mind churning. 3 days until she started teaching. No appropriate clothes, no teaching supplies, no way to make her sparse room even minimally comfortable. She would have to write to the school board and explain the situation, hope they would be understanding. Perhaps they could provide some basic supplies for the classroom. Perhaps she could borrow a dress from someone, though she did not know a soul in this town. At supper that evening, she sat at the long table in Mrs. Patterson's dining room with the other boarders, a traveling salesman, 2 cowboys passing through, and an older woman who never spoke to anyone. The food was plain but adequate, and Natalie ate mechanically, her mind elsewhere. After the meal, she returned to her room and tried to sleep on the bare mattress, using her shawl as a pillow. The summer night was stifling, and through the thin walls, she could hear snoring from the neighboring room. She lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, trying not to think about her grandmother's quilts or the books of poetry or all the carefully chosen items that had represented her hopes for this new life. By morning, she had formulated a plan. She would go to the school board office first thing and explain her situation. Then she would visit every shop in town, asking if they needed temporary help. Any work would do: washing dishes, sweeping floors, mending clothes. She could work evenings and Saturdays to earn extra money. It would take time to replace what she had lost, but she was young and strong and determined. She would make this work. The school board office was in a small building near the church. Mr. Garrison, the head of the board, was a portly man with mutton-chop whiskers and an air of self-importance. He listened to Natalie's explanation with increasing impatience. "This is highly irregular, Miss Jensen. We hired you with the understanding that you would arrive prepared to teach. The other candidates we interviewed all had their own supplies." "I understand, sir, and I apologize for the inconvenience. However, this was entirely beyond my control. The freight company lost my belongings, and I have filed a claim, but they say it may take months to resolve. I'm asking if the school might be able to provide some basic supplies, slates, chalk, a few primers, just until I can replace my own materials." Mr. Garrison leaned back in his chair, studying her with an expression that made her want to squirm. "The school has a very limited budget, Miss Jensen. We cannot simply hand out supplies to teachers who arrive unprepared. Perhaps if you had been more careful in your travel arrangements. I used a reputable freight company, sir. I took every reasonable precaution." "Nonetheless, this is your problem to solve, not ours. I expect you to be fully prepared to teach when school begins on Monday. If you cannot manage that, I will have to reconsider your employment." Natalie felt as if he had slapped her. "Mr. Garrison, I will be there on Monday, and I will teach to the very best of my ability. But I am asking for basic assistance in a situation that was completely beyond my control. Surely the school board can understand that, and, Miss Jensen," his voice was cold, "in my experience, people who start making excuses before they have even begun their employment rarely work out well. You have until Monday. I suggest you use your time wisely." She left the office with her hands trembling and her eyes burning with unshed tears. The injustice of it, the complete lack of compassion, felt like a physical weight on her chest. She had done nothing wrong. She had been responsible and careful, and still she was being blamed for circumstances entirely beyond her control. The next 2 days passed in a blur of frustration. She found no temporary work. The shops had all the help they needed, and most were reluctant to hire a woman who could only work limited hours. She spent precious coins on a length of simple calico fabric and stayed up late into the night sewing a basic dress by the light of a single candle. Her stitches were neat and straight. Her grandmother had taught her well, but the dress was plain and unadorned, barely suitable for standing in front of a classroom. She washed her traveling dress and hung it to dry in her room, knowing she would have to alternate between the 2 garments day after day. By Sunday evening, she had assembled a pitiful collection of teaching materials, purchased with money she could not afford to spend: a few pieces of chalk, some scrap paper, a single primer that was missing its back cover. Her room remained sparse, the bed still lacking sheets or blankets. She owned one towel, one change of undergarments, 2 dresses, and a pair of shoes that pinched her feet. This was not how her new life was supposed to begin. That night, she prayed for the first time since her grandmother had died, not because she was particularly religious, but because she had nowhere else to turn. Please, let tomorrow go well. Let the children be kind. Let me be able to teach them despite having so little. Let this work out somehow. Monday morning dawned hot and humid, the kind of weather that made clothing stick to skin and tempers run short. Natalie dressed carefully in her new calico dress, pinned her hair into a tight bun, and walked the half-mile to the schoolhouse on the edge of town. It was a simple wooden structure, one room with windows on both sides and a small bell tower. Inside, rough-hewn benches served as seats, and a battered desk stood at the front near a slate board that had seen better days. The room smelled of chalk dust and old wood and possibility. Her students began arriving at 8 o'clock, children ranging from 6 to 14, dressed in homespun clothes, many of them barefoot despite the start of the school term. Farm children, mostly, with sun-browned skin and cautious eyes. They filed in quietly, taking their seats, studying her with the frank curiosity of the young. Natalie counted 23 students in total, more than she had expected. "Good morning," she said, forcing confidence into her voice. "My name is Miss Jensen, and I will be your teacher this year. I'm very pleased to meet all of you." A small girl in the front row raised her hand. "Where are you from, Miss Jensen? You talk funny." Despite her nervousness, Natalie smiled. "I am from Philadelphia. That's a city very far from here, in Pennsylvania, and I suppose I do sound different from how people speak here. You will have to be patient with me as I learn your ways, just as I will be patient with you as we learn together." The morning passed better than she had feared. The children were attentive, eager to learn despite the heat and the cramped conditions. She had them introduce themselves one by one, then began with basic arithmetic, using the slate board to work through problems. She had them read aloud from the single primer, taking turns, and was pleased to discover that several of the older children were quite proficient. By midday, when she dismissed them for lunch, she felt the first stirrings of hope. Maybe she could do this. Maybe the lack of materials would not matter as much as her dedication and creativity. But as the children filed out, chattering and laughing, Mr. Garrison entered. His expression was stern, and he made a show of examining the nearly empty schoolroom. "I see you have very few supplies, Miss Jensen." "I'm managing with what I have, sir. The children are bright and eager to learn. We will make do." "Making do is not what we hired you for. We expected a professional teacher with professional materials." He walked to the desk, rifling through her meager collection. "One primer? A few pieces of chalk? This is unacceptable." "Mr. Garrison, as I explained, my supplies were lost by the freight company. I'm doing the best I can under difficult circumstances." "Your circumstances are not my concern. The education of these children is my concern." He straightened, clasping his hands behind his back. "I will give you 2 weeks, Miss Jensen. 2 weeks to acquire proper teaching materials and present yourself in a manner befitting your position. If you cannot do so, I will terminate your employment and find someone who can meet our standards." After he left, Natalie sank into the chair at her desk, fighting back tears. 2 weeks. How could she possibly replace everything she had lost in 2 weeks? Even with her salary, which would not be paid until the end of the month, she could not afford a fraction of what she needed. The injustice of it burned in her chest. She was a good teacher. She knew she was. But apparently, that did not matter if she did not have enough money to look the part. That evening, she was so exhausted and discouraged that she skipped supper, unable to face Mrs. Patterson's disapproving stares or the other boarders' small talk. She sat in her dim room as the sun set, watching shadows lengthen across the bare floor, feeling more alone than she had ever felt in her life. A knock on the door interrupted her despair. When she opened it, expecting Mrs. Patterson with some complaint, she found instead a boy of about 12 standing in the hallway, nearly buckling under the weight of a large wooden crate. "Delivery for Miss Natalie Jensen," he gasped out, his face red with effort. "There must be some mistake. I have not ordered anything." "No mistake, madam. Man paid me $1 to bring this here from the mercantile. Said it was for the new school teacher. Near broke my back carrying it, but $1 is $1." Natalie helped him bring the crate into her room, mystified. After the boy left, she stared at it for a long moment before gathering the courage to pry open the lid. When she did, her breath caught in her throat. The crate was packed full of supplies, fabric in various colors and patterns, sturdy cotton, soft muslin, warm flannel. Sewing notions, thread in every shade, needles, pins, buttons, scissors, a bolt of practical gray wool that would make a perfect winter dress, a ready-made shawl in deep blue, a pair of leather boots that looked like they would actually fit, stockings, a hairbrush, a small mirror, a bar of fine lavender soap, 2 thick wool blankets, a set of white cotton sheets, a feather pillow, a tin canister of tea, a jar of honey. And beneath all of that, teaching supplies, slates, chalk, 3 brand-new primers, a stack of clean paper, pens, ink, a world map that could be tacked to the wall, a globe that had clearly cost more than everything else combined. Natalie's hands shook as she lifted each item out, laying them on the bed, the chair, the floor. It was too much. It was far too much. The value of everything in this crate was easily $100, maybe more. Who would do this? Who could afford such generosity? At the bottom of the crate, she found a note written in an untidy scrawl on brown paper. Miss Jensen, heard you had trouble with the freight company. Nobody should have to start over with nothing. These things are yours. No need to pay me back, just teach those kids well. That will be payment enough. R. Thorne. R. Thorne. Ryder. The mountain man from the mercantile. Natalie sank onto the bed, clutching the note, and this time she did not fight the tears. They poured down her cheeks, hot and cleansing, washing away the fear and frustration and loneliness that had built up over the past 5 days. Someone had seen her struggle. Someone had cared enough to help. A stranger had spent a fortune to replace what she had lost, expecting nothing in return. She cried until she had no tears left, then dried her face and looked around at the supplies scattered everywhere. She needed to find this man, to thank him, to somehow express what his kindness meant. But according to the clerk at the mercantile, Ryder Thorne lived somewhere in the mountains, a trapper who came to town only for supplies. How would she ever find him? The next morning, she dressed in a fresh set of undergarments and her patched traveling dress, saving the new fabric for when she had time to sew properly. She made her bed with the clean white sheets and the wool blankets, an indescribable luxury after nights on the bare mattress. Then she loaded as many teaching supplies as she could carry into a canvas bag she found in the crate and walked to school feeling as if the world had shifted into brighter colors. The children's faces lit up when they saw the new materials. The slates were passed out, met with exclamations of delight. The globe became the centerpiece of a geography lesson that had every student leaning forward with interest. The world map went up on the wall, and suddenly their small schoolhouse felt connected to something larger, to continents and oceans they had only heard about in stories. At midday, the same boy who had delivered the crate appeared at the schoolhouse door. Miss Jensen, got another delivery for you. Left it outside because it would not fit through the door. She followed him out to find a beautiful wooden bookshelf, simply made but sturdy, with 3 shelves that would be perfect for organizing the classroom. And beside it, 2 more crates filled with books readers, arithmetic books, history texts, even a few volumes of poetry and classic literature. Who brought this? She asked, though she already knew. Same man as before. Big fellow. Looks like he could wrestle a bear. Paid me $2 this time on account of the bookshelf being so heavy. The boy grinned. Told him I would haul anything he wanted for that kind of money. Natalie helped him carry everything inside, her heart pounding. This was more than generosity. This was someone who truly understood what she needed, who had taken the time to think about not just her personal circumstances, but her ability to do her job. She arranged the books on the shelves while her students watched in awe. Many of them had never seen so many books in one place. When Mr. Garrison stopped by that afternoon for his daily inspection, his eyes widened at the transformed schoolroom. Well, he said, clearly taken aback, I see you have managed to acquire some supplies after all. Yes, sir, through the extraordinary kindness of a benefactor. She kept her voice neutral, though part of her wanted to point out that he could have shown a fraction of that kindness himself. Yes. Well. Carry on, Miss Jensen. After the children left for the day, Natalie stood in the schoolroom, running her hand along the smooth wood of the bookshelf. She had to find Ryder Thorne. She had to thank him properly. But more than that, she needed to understand why. Why would a mountain man, someone who lived in isolation and had no connection to the school or the town, spend what must have been a significant portion of his earnings to help a complete stranger? She returned to the mercantile that evening, waiting until the shop was empty of other customers before approaching the clerk. "Excuse me, I am Natalie Jensen, the school teacher. I wanted to ask about Mr. Thorne, the man who purchased supplies for me. I would very much like to thank him personally. Do you know when he might return to town?" The clerk, whose name she learned was Samuel, shook his head. "Ryder does not come to town on any kind of schedule, Miss Jensen. Sometimes we will see him every few weeks, sometimes not for months. He lives up in the mountains, about a day's ride north of here, traps in the winter, hunts year-round. Keeps to himself mostly. Is there a way to get a message to him? I owe him a tremendous debt of gratitude." Samuel looked uncomfortable. "Well, I suppose I could mention to some of the other trappers that you are looking for him, but I cannot guarantee anything. Ryder is not exactly the social type, if you know what I mean. Good man, but he prefers solitude." "I understand. Still, if you hear that he is coming to town, would you let me know? I am staying at Mrs. Patterson's boarding house, and I'm at the school every weekday." "I will do that, Miss Jensen." But 3 weeks passed with no word. Summer deepened into August, the heat relentless, the prairie grass turning golden. Natalie settled into her new life, teaching her students each day, sewing new dresses from the fabric in her room each evening. The children adored her, and even Mr. Garrison had grudgingly admitted that she was doing an acceptable job. She made a few friends among the townspeople, the minister's wife, who invited her to Sunday dinner, and a young woman named Mary, who worked at the general store and shared Natalie's love of books. But always, in the back of her mind, was the thought of Ryder Thorne. She had memorized the note he had sent, those few simple sentences that had meant everything. She found herself watching the street from her window, hoping to catch a glimpse of a tall, broad-shouldered figure. She asked Samuel at the mercantile every few days if he had heard anything. The answer was always no. "He will show up eventually," Samuel assured her. "Ryder always does, but he comes and goes on his own terms." September arrived, bringing cooler temperatures and the first hints of autumn color in the trees along the river. The school year was in full swing, and Natalie's classroom thrived. She had used some of her first month's salary to purchase a few personal items and to send money toward her boarding house rent in advance, determined never to be caught unprepared again. The rest she saved carefully, already planning for the winter months when she would need warmer clothing. On a Thursday afternoon in mid-September, she was helping one of the younger students sound out words when Samuel burst into the schoolhouse, out of breath. "Miss Jensen, he is here. Ryder just rode in. He's at the mercantile right now." Her heart leaped. "Thank you, Samuel. Thank you." She turned to her students. "Class, please work on your reading assignments quietly. I will return in a few minutes." She hurried down the street, suddenly nervous. What would she say? How could she possibly express what his kindness had meant? She had rehearsed speeches in her mind dozens of times, but now, faced with the actual moment, every word fled. The mercantile was dim after the bright afternoon sun. She paused inside the doorway, letting her eyes adjust. Ryder Thorne stood at the counter, his back to her, talking to the clerk in that rough, quiet voice she remembered. He was even larger than she recalled, his presence dominating the space. He wore buckskin pants and a shirt made of some kind of hide, and his long, dark hair was tied back with a leather cord. A hunting knife hung at his belt, and his hands, resting on the counter, were broad and scarred with hard use. "And I need more ammunition," he was saying. 50 rounds of the Winchester, another 50 of the pistol." "Planning on a war?" the clerk joked. "Planning on surviving the winter. Wolves have been worse this year than any I have seen." Natalie gathered her courage and stepped forward. "Mr. Thorne?" He turned, and once again she was struck by those pale gray eyes, startling in his weathered face. Recognition flickered across his features, followed by what might have been discomfort. "Miss Jensen, I wanted to thank you for the supplies, for everything you did. I cannot possibly express how much it meant, how much difference it made. You saved my livelihood. You saved my entire situation here." The words tumbled out in a rush, not eloquent, but deeply felt. He shifted his weight, looking like he wanted to be anywhere else. No need for thanks. Heard you had trouble. Figured I could help. But the expense, it must have been a fortune. I want to pay you back. It will take time, but I will. No. The word was firm. That was not a loan. It was a gift. You do not owe me anything. But I do. I owe you everything. You do not understand. Without what you did, I would have lost my position. The school board was going to dismiss me if I could not acquire proper materials, and I had no way to... Her voice caught, embarrassing tears threatening. His expression softened slightly. The school board are fools if they would have dismissed you. From what Samuel says, you are the best teacher this town has had. Samuel is exaggerating, but the children are wonderful, and I love teaching them, and I have you to thank for making it possible. She took a breath, steadying herself. Please, at least allow me to cook you a meal, to show my gratitude properly. It is the least I can do. He looked at her for a long moment, and she had the unsettling feeling that he could see right through her polite veneer to the loneliness and struggle beneath. I do not need anything, Miss Jensen. Just do good work with those kids, that's enough. It is not enough, not for me. She lifted her chin, meeting his eyes directly. I am not someone who can accept such kindness without acknowledgement. Please, one meal. I am not a fancy cook, but I am competent, and I owe you far more than a meal. But it is what I can offer. A slight smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, barely visible beneath the beard. You are persistent. I am grateful. There is a difference. All right, one meal, but nothing fancy. I am not suited to fancy. Relief and something else, anticipation, nervousness flooded through her. Tomorrow evening, there's a cafe near the school that rents their kitchen sometimes. I can prepare something there. 7 o'clock? 7 o'clock. He nodded once, then turned back to his supplies, clearly considering the conversation finished. Natalie left the mercantile with her heart racing. She had a day to plan, to prepare, to figure out what to cook for a mountain man who had changed her life with his unexpected kindness. More than that, she had a day to prepare herself for actually spending time with Ryder Thorne, to try to understand the man behind the generosity. That night, she lay in her comfortable bed, made comfortable by his gift, and wondered what tomorrow would bring. She told herself this was simply about gratitude, about proper manners and acknowledgement of a debt, but a small, honest part of her acknowledged that it was more than that. Ryder Thorne intrigued her. His quiet strength, his casual generosity, the contrast between his rough exterior and his thoughtful actions, all of it drew her curiosity like a magnet. She had come west looking for a new life, for purpose and independence. She had not come looking for romance. And yet, as she drifted toward sleep, it was the image of storm-gray eyes and a weathered face that filled her mind. The next day dragged interminably. Natalie taught her lessons on autopilot, her mind already racing ahead to the evening. After school, she stopped at the mercantile to purchase supplies, a good cut of beef, potatoes, carrots, onions, flour for biscuits, butter, a small jar of preserves. She bargained with Mrs. Collins at the cafe for use of the kitchen, explaining that she wanted to thank someone who had helped her. Would this be the mountain man everyone has been gossiping about? Mrs. Collins asked with a knowing look. The one who bought out half of Samuel's inventory for you. Heat flooded Natalie's cheeks. I did not realize people were gossiping. This is a small town, dear. Of course people are gossiping. And I will tell you right now, Ryder Thorne is a good man. Keeps to himself, but he is honest and decent. Few years back, he tracked down a child who had wandered away from town and got lost in the hills. Searched for 2 days straight, did not stop until he found her. The family wanted to reward him, but he refused. That is the kind of man he is. The information settled something in Natalie's chest, confirming what she had already sensed. Thank you for telling me. You can use the kitchen for $2. And if I might offer some advice, Mrs. Collins leaned closer. Do not try too hard. Ryder is not a man who appreciates fuss. Simple and genuine is what will reach him. Natalie took the advice to heart. She prepared a straightforward meal beef stew, rich with vegetables, fluffy biscuits, strong coffee. Nothing fancy, as he had requested, but made with care. She set a small table in the corner of the cafe with 2 chairs, a simple cloth, and a single wildflower in a cup. Then she changed into one of the new dresses she had sewn from the fabric he had given her, a deep green that brought out the hints of auburn in her dark hair. Ryder arrived exactly at 7 o'clock, still dressed in his buckskins, his hair damp as if he had dunked his head in the water trough. He looked profoundly uncomfortable as he ducked through the doorway of the cafe, his eyes darting around the empty room before settling on her. "Evening, Miss Jensen." "Good evening, Mr. Thorne. Thank you for coming. Please, sit." He lowered himself into the chair carefully, as if afraid it might collapse under his weight. When she served the stew, he stared at it for a moment before picking up his spoon. "This looks good. I hope it tastes good too. I confess I'm a bit nervous. I do not often cook for people who have saved my entire livelihood." That slight smile appeared again. "I think you are giving me too much credit." "I do not think I am giving you enough credit." She sat across from him, folding her hands in her lap. "Mr. Thorne, may I call you Ryder?" "Most people do." "Ryder, I've been trying to understand why you did what you did. You do not know me. You had no obligation to help. And yet you spent what must have been a significant amount of money on a complete stranger. Why?" He was quiet for a long moment, chewing thoughtfully. "I know what it is like to have nothing, to start over from scratch. When I was 15, my family's farm was raided. My parents and sister were killed. I survived, but just barely. I had nothing but the clothes on my back and a rifle I managed to grab as I ran. If people had not helped me along the way, I would not have survived that first year." He looked up, meeting her eyes. "You do not forget that kind of kindness, and when you are in a position to pass it on, you do. That is all." The simple explanation, delivered without self-pity or expectation of praise, touched something deep in Natalie's heart. "I'm so sorry for your loss. That is terrible. It was a long time ago, 14 years now. I've made my peace with it." He took another bite of stew. "This really is good. Better than anything I have eaten in months. Surely you cook for yourself." "I cook, but I do not make it taste like this." He reached for a biscuit, splitting it open and spreading butter. "Mostly I cook because I need to eat, not because I enjoy it." "What is it like living in the mountains, being alone so much of the time?" His expression shifted, becoming distant. "Peaceful. Quiet. You learn to read the land, the animals, the weather. You learn what matters and what does not. Most people spend their whole lives surrounded by noise and distraction. They never really see what is right in front of them." "Do you ever get lonely?" The question seemed to surprise him. "Sometimes, but there are worse things than loneliness. And it is not true solitude. The land itself is alive. The animals, the seasons, the way light falls through the trees. That is company enough most days." Natalie found herself fascinated by his perspective, so different from anything she had known. "I grew up in a city, Philadelphia. I never even saw a real forest until I traveled west. Everything here is so vast and open, sometimes it overwhelms me." "You will adjust. People are more adaptable than they think." He finished his stew and leaned back slightly. "How are your students doing? Samuel says you have a way with them." "They are wonderful, bright and curious and eager to learn. Some of them have so little they share books. They walk miles to school each day, but they show up and they work hard. It makes me want to be the best teacher I can possibly be." That is what they need. Someone who cares. Someone who sees them as more than just mouths to feed or hands to work the fields. There was unexpected passion in his voice. "Every child deserves a chance to learn, to make something of themselves. You are giving them that chance." They talked long after the food was finished, the conversation flowing more easily than Natalie would have thought possible. Ryder was not a man of many words, but when he spoke, his words carried weight. He told her about the mountains, about tracking wolves and reading weather patterns. She told him about Philadelphia, about her grandmother who had raised her, about the decision to come west. The evening light faded to darkness outside the cafe windows, and Mrs. Collins discreetly left them alone. It was only when the clock struck 9 that Natalie realized how much time had passed. "I've kept you far too long. I'm sure you have things to do." Ryder stood, and the room suddenly felt smaller. "I enjoyed this more than I expected to." "So did I." The admission came easily. "When will you return to the mountains?" "Tomorrow morning. I have what I need, and staying in town longer than necessary makes me restless." Disappointment flickered through her, though she tried to hide it. Of course, well, thank you again, for everything, for the supplies, for sharing this evening, for telling me about your life. It has meant a great deal. He nodded, then hesitated as if debating something. Finally, he said, "If you ever need anything, Miss Jensen, send word through Samuel at the Mercantile. He knows how to reach me." "Thank you. I hope everything goes well with your trapping this season." She watched him leave, his broad shoulders disappearing into the darkness, and felt an unexpected ache of loss. Which was ridiculous, she told herself firmly. She barely knew this man. He had done her a kindness, she had thanked him, and now he was returning to his life while she continued with hers. That was how the world worked. But over the following weeks, she found her thoughts drifting to him more often than they should. She would be in the middle of a lesson and suddenly remember the way he had talked about the mountains, the quiet reverence in his voice. She would be sewing in her room at night and think about how he had lost his entire family at just 15 and had somehow survived, built a life for himself in the wilderness. She would see the beautiful teaching supplies he had given her and feel a warmth that had nothing to do with gratitude and everything to do with the growing realization that Ryder Thorne had affected her in ways she had not anticipated. October brought spectacular color to the trees along the Missouri River and a crispness to the air that made teaching more pleasant. The schoolhouse was cozy now, filled with books and supplies and the eager voices of children learning. Natalie's life had settled into a comfortable rhythm. She rented a small house on the edge of town, tired of Mrs. Patterson's boarding house rules and wanting her own space. It was tiny, just 2 rooms and a kitchen, but it was hers, and she furnished it slowly with items purchased from her salary and things she made herself. Mary from the general store became a close friend, and they spent Sunday afternoons together, trading books and talking about everything from poetry to politics. The minister's wife, Mrs. Howard, taught Natalie to bake proper bread and invited her to join the church social committee. Slowly, Council Bluffs was becoming home, but still, in quiet moments, she thought about Ryder. In late October, Samuel sent word through Mary that Ryder had been in town briefly, dropping off pelts and collecting mail. He had asked after Natalie, wanting to know if she was doing well. The news made her heart race absurdly. "Did he leave any message?" she asked Mary, trying to sound casual. "Just to tell you that he hopes you are well and that the school supplies are working out." Such a simple message, but Natalie treasured it anyway. He had thought of her. That meant something, did it not? November arrived with freezing rain and early snow. The schoolhouse required a fire every morning, and the children arrived with red cheeks and cold hands. Natalie made it a practice to have hot cider waiting for them, purchased from her own funds because she could not bear to see them shivering. The lessons continued despite the weather, and she marveled at the resilience of these frontier children who thought nothing of walking 3 miles through snow to get to school. On a gray afternoon just before Thanksgiving, she dismissed class early due to an approaching storm. The sky had taken on that peculiar yellowish cast that meant serious snow was coming, and she wanted the children safely home. After they left, she stayed to clean up, banking the fire carefully and straightening books. She was just putting on her heavy cloak when she heard a horse outside. Through the window, she saw Ryder dismounting, his horse steaming in the cold air. Her heart did something complicated in her chest. She opened the door before he could knock. "Ryder, what are you doing here? There is a storm coming." "I know. That is why I'm here." He looked past her into the schoolhouse. "You planning to walk home?" "It is not far, just at the edge of town. Too far in what is coming. That storm is going to hit hard within the hour." He gestured to his horse. "I will take you home." "That is not necessary. I have walked in snow before. Not like what is coming. Miss Jensen, Natalie, please. I am asking you to let me get you home safely." The use of her first name startled her, as did the genuine concern in his voice. "All right. Thank you." He helped her onto his horse, then swung up behind her. His arms came around her to hold the reins, and suddenly she was surrounded by his warmth, his solid presence. The horse started forward at his command, and Natalie tried to ignore how aware she was of every point of contact between them. "How did you know about the storm?" she asked, as much to distract herself as out of curiosity. "You learn to read the signs, the way the clouds build, the way animals behave, the feel of the air. This one is going to be bad. 3 feet of snow at least, maybe more." 3 feet? That seems like a great deal. This is Iowa in November. It happens. His voice rumbled from behind her, close enough that she felt it as much as heard it. You have supplies? Food? Wood for heating? I have some, enough for a few days. Not enough. After I get you home, I'm bringing supplies. Ryder, you do not need to. Yes, I do. There was no arguing with the finality in his tone. He helped her down at her small house, and she hurried inside to start a fire while he rode back toward town. The wind was picking up, moaning around the corners of the house. Through the window she could see snow beginning to fall, thick and fast. Ryder returned within the hour, leading a pack horse loaded with supplies. He made 3 trips from the horse to her small kitchen, piling up sacks of flour, sugar, coffee, beans, salt pork, dried fruit, and more. He stacked firewood by her stove until she protested she could not possibly use that much. He checked the house for drafts, stuffing rags in cracks she had not even noticed. By the time he finished, the snow was falling so heavily that she could barely see across the street. You need to stay, she said firmly. You cannot ride out in this. It would be suicide. He looked toward the door, clearly debating. I do not want to impose. You are not imposing. You are being practical. Please, Ryder, stay until the storm passes. He finally nodded. I will sleep on the floor. Just need a blanket. You will not sleep on the floor. I have a spare room with a bed. It was barely more than a closet with a narrow cot, but it was better than the floor. And you will have supper with me. The least I can do is feed you properly after all this. They settled into an oddly comfortable domestic rhythm. Natalie cooked while Ryder tended the fire and checked the house periodically. The storm outside intensified, wind howling and snow piling against the windows. But inside, it was warm and bright, filled with the smell of cooking food and the quiet companionship of 2 people who were gradually becoming friends. Over supper they talked about everything and nothing. Ryder told her about a wolf pack he had been tracking, the intelligence of the alpha female who seemed to outwit him at every turn. Natalie told him about her students, about little Emma who was learning to read despite being nearly blind in one eye, about Thomas who had a gift for mathematics that she hoped to nurture. The conversation flowed easily, punctuated by comfortable silences. Why did you become a teacher? Ryder asked as they cleaned up after the meal. My grandmother, Natalie said simply. She was a teacher before she married. She taught me that education was freedom, that knowledge opened doors that would otherwise remain closed. After my parents died, she made sure I had every opportunity to learn, even though we had very little money. I wanted to pass that gift on to others. She sounds like she was a remarkable woman. She was. I miss her every day. Natalie dried the last dish, setting it carefully on the shelf. What about you? Have you always lived in the mountains? Not always. After my family died, I drifted for a few years. Worked on ranches, did some mining, tried my hand at various things, but I kept being drawn back to the wilderness. There is something about it that feels right to me, like I belong there in a way I have never belonged anywhere else. Do you ever think about doing something different? Living in town, maybe? His expression grew distant. Sometimes, mostly when I'm injured or sick, and realize how vulnerable being alone makes you. But then I recover and head back to the mountains, and I remember why I chose this life. He looked at her directly. What about you? Do you think you will stay in Council Bluffs? I do not know, she answered honestly. I love teaching and I love my students, but sometimes I wonder if I will always feel like an outsider here. If there will ever be a place where I truly belong. Give it time. Belonging is not something that happens overnight. The storm raged through the night. Natalie lay in her bed, listening to the wind and knowing that Ryder was just on the other side of the thin wall. She felt safe in a way she had not felt since leaving Philadelphia, as if his presence alone was enough to keep any harm at bay. It was a dangerous feeling, she knew. She should not be coming to rely on him, should not be letting herself care about a man who lived his life in isolation and would be gone as soon as the storm passed. But her heart, it seemed, had other ideas. Morning brought a world transformed. Snow had drifted to the windowsills, and the landscape was buried under a thick white blanket. The storm had passed, leaving behind crystalline beauty and bitter cold. Ryder spent the morning digging out paths to the woodpile, to the outhouse, to the road. Natalie made breakfast and watched him work through the window, his breath fogging in the frigid air, his powerful body making light work of the heavy snow. When he came inside, his cheeks were red with cold, and she had hot coffee waiting for him. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For everything. For knowing the storm was coming, for bringing supplies, for staying to make sure I was safe. You keep saving me." He wrapped his hands around the coffee cup, warming them. "You do not need saving, Natalie. You are one of the strongest people I have met. You just needed a little help at the right time." "Strong?" She laughed softly. "I do not feel strong. I feel like I am constantly scrambling to keep up, to prove I belong here. That is what strength is, not never struggling, but continuing despite the struggle." He set down the cup and looked at her seriously. "You lost everything and rebuilt. You face down school board members who have no appreciation for what you do. You win the hearts of children and give them hope for a better future. If that is not strength, I do not know what is." His words unlocked something in her chest, a tight knot of anxiety she had been carrying since arriving in Council Bluffs. To be seen so clearly, to be understood, it was a gift more precious than any material goods he had given her. "I should go," Ryder said, though he did not move. "The storm has passed, and I have things I need to take care of before winter truly sets in. Will I see you again?" The question came out more plaintive than she intended. "Do you want to?" "Yes." There was no point in lying. "I do." Something shifted in his expression, a barrier lowering. "I will be in town before Christmas, for supplies and to deliver pelts. Maybe we could have supper again." "I would like that very much." He left an hour later, riding out into the snow-covered landscape. Natalie watched until he was out of sight, then turned back to her warm house, her stocked kitchen, her comfortable life that he had helped make possible. But the house felt emptier now, and she realized with a start that she was counting the days until she might see him again. The weeks leading up to Christmas were busy. The school held a pageant, and Natalie spent hours helping her students prepare songs and recitations. She sewed costumes from scraps of fabric, stayed late to build scenery, and watched with pride as her students performed for the packed schoolhouse. Even Mr. Garrison grudgingly admitted that it was well done. She bought small gifts for each of her students, pieces of candy, hair ribbons, small toys from the mercantile. It took most of her December salary, but seeing their faces light up on the last day of term made it worthwhile. Christmas Eve found her alone in her small house, the fire crackling merrily, the smell of baking bread filling the air. She'd been invited to the Howards for Christmas dinner the next day, but tonight was her own. She had just settled into her chair with a book when a knock sounded at the door. Ryder stood on her doorstep, covered in snow, leading a horse laden with supplies. "You came," she breathed, joy flooding through her. "Told you I would." He stomped snow from his boots. "Brought you something." He carried in a large bundle wrapped in oilcloth and set it carefully on her table. When she unwrapped it, tears sprang to her eyes. Inside were 2 quilts, beautifully made, one in shades of blue and green like a forest, the other in warm reds and golds like autumn leaves. "You said you lost your grandmother's quilts," Ryder said quietly. "I know these cannot replace them, but I thought you should have something to keep you warm. There is a woman in town, Mrs. Fletcher. She makes quilts. I commissioned these." Natalie ran her hand over the intricate stitching, overwhelmed. "They are beautiful." "Ryder, this is too much. You have already given me so much. It is Christmas, and I wanted you to have something that mattered, not just practical things." He shifted his weight, looking uncomfortable. "There is something else." He handed her a small box. Inside was a delicate silver chain with a small pendant, a tiny book, perfectly detailed. "For the teacher," he said. "So you remember what you are giving those children. Knowledge, hope, a future. That matters more than anything else." She could not stop the tears this time. "No one has ever given me anything like this. No one has ever understood what teaching means to me the way you do." "I understand you," he said simply, "and I wanted you to know that." She looked up at him, this rough mountain man with the gentlest heart she had ever known, and realized that somewhere along the way, gratitude had transformed into something deeper. She was falling in love with Ryder Thorne, perhaps had already fallen. "Stay," she whispered. "Stay for Christmas, please." "Natalie." His voice was rough with emotion he did not voice. "I know you prefer solitude. I know the mountains are your home. But just for one day, stay." Let me give you Christmas. Let me show you that you do not always have to be alone." He looked at her for a long moment, something warring in his expression. Finally, he nodded. One day. They spent Christmas together in her small house, and it was the best Christmas Natalie had ever known. She cooked a simple meal: roasted chicken, potatoes, vegetables, and apple pie she had made the day before. They talked and laughed and sat by the fire. She read aloud from one of her favorite books while he whittled a small figure from a piece of wood, his large hands surprisingly deft. As darkness fell, he told her stories about the mountains in winter, about the profound silence of snow-covered forests, and the way stars looked when you were miles from any lamp or fire. "I have never seen stars like that," Natalie said wistfully. "In the city you can barely see them at all. Even here in town there are too many lights." "I will show you someday," Ryder said. "If you want." "I want," she said immediately. "I want to see the world the way you see it." As the evening deepened, they sat together on her small sofa, the fire burning low. The conversation had lulled into comfortable quiet when Ryder spoke. "I have to tell you something." His serious tone made her nervous. "All right." "I have never been good with words. I am better with actions. But I need you to understand something." He turned to face her, his gray eyes intense in the firelight. "You have gotten under my skin, Natalie Jensen. Since the day I saw you in the mercantile, standing there trying so hard to be brave when your world had just fallen apart, I have not been able to stop thinking about you. At first, I told myself it was just wanting to help someone in need, then it was admiration for your strength. But somewhere along the way, it became more than that." Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "Ryder, let me finish. I know I am not the kind of man who makes sense for you. You are educated and refined and meant for civilization. I live in the mountains and go weeks without talking to another person, but I cannot deny how I feel anymore. I am falling in love with you. Maybe I have been since the beginning. And I needed you to know that, even if nothing can come of it." For a moment, Natalie could not speak. Then the words came tumbling out. "You think nothing can come of it? Ryder, I have been falling in love with you too. Every time you showed up, every kindness, every conversation, I tried to tell myself it was just gratitude or admiration. But it is so much more than that. You see me in a way no one else ever has. You understand what matters to me. And yes, we are different. But maybe that is exactly right. Maybe we balance each other." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face with one large calloused hand. "Are you sure? Because once I kiss you, Natalie, I'm not going to be able to let you go." "Then do not let me go," she whispered. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, as if he was afraid of his own strength. But when she leaned into him, her hands coming up to grip his shoulders, it deepened. There was warmth and tenderness and a promise of everything they could be together. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Natalie felt like the world had shifted on its axis. "Stay," she said again. "Not just for Christmas. Stay longer. Give us time to figure out what this is, what it could be. I have obligations in the mountains. Trap lines to check, supplies cache that need tending." He stroked her hair gently. "But I will come back, as often as I can. And when spring comes, when school is done for the year, maybe you could come up to the mountains. Spend some time there, see if you could imagine that life." "I do not need to imagine," she said firmly. "I know what I want. But yes, I will come to the mountains. I want to see your world." He stayed 3 more days, and they were the happiest days of Natalie's life. They talked about everything: their hopes, their fears, their dreams for the future. Ryder told her about the cabin he had built in the mountains, describing every detail. Natalie told him about her students, her plans for the spring term, her desire to eventually start a lending library in Council Bluffs. They made no specific promises about the future, but the understanding between them was clear. They were building toward something, carefully and deliberately. When Ryder finally left, riding back into the mountains with a promise to return in February, Natalie did not feel sad. Instead, she felt hope. For the first time since leaving Philadelphia, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be, moving toward exactly what she was meant to find. January and February were long months of cold and snow, Natalie threw herself into teaching, planning lessons that challenged her students and made them excited to learn. She wrote long letters to Ryder, leaving them with Samuel at the mercantile to be delivered when Ryder came for supplies. In return, she received letters written in his rough hand, telling her about the mountains, about his days, about how much he missed her. "I never thought I would be the kind of man who missed another person," he wrote in one letter. "I have been alone so long it became natural. But now the silence feels empty instead of peaceful. I find myself wanting to tell you things about a beautiful sunrise I saw, or a particularly cunning fox that stole my bait. You have changed something fundamental in me, and I am grateful for it, even though it makes the solitude harder." She treasured every word, reading the letters over and over by lamplight. True to his word, Ryder appeared in mid-February, his horse laden with pelts to sell. He spent 4 days in Council Bluffs, and they were together every moment he was not conducting business. They took walks along the frozen river, bundled against the cold. They had dinner at the cafe where they had shared their first meal. He sat in the back of her classroom one afternoon and watched her teach, and afterward told her it was one of the most beautiful things he had ever witnessed. "The way you are with them," he said, shaking his head in wonder, "the patience and care and genuine love. Those children are so lucky to have you." "I am the lucky one," she countered. "They teach me as much as I teach them." On his last night before returning to the mountains, they sat together in her small house, talking quietly by the fire. "When school ends in May, come up to the mountains," Ryder said. "Stay with me for the summer. I want to show you everything, and I want to know if you could be happy there, at least part of the time." "Part of the time?" she asked. "I have been thinking," he said carefully. "I know teaching matters to you. I would never ask you to give that up. But maybe we could find a balance. Maybe I could trap in the winter when school is in session, come to town more often so we can be together. And in the summer when you are free, you could be in the mountains with me. It would not be easy, but I think we could make it work, if you want to." "Are you asking me to marry you, Ryder Thorne?" He smiled, that rare full smile that transformed his entire face. "Not yet. First, you need to see my world and be sure. But yes, eventually, that is exactly what I'm asking. I want you to be my wife, Natalie. I want to build a life with you, whatever form that takes." She kissed him then, pouring all her love and certainty into it. "I already know my answer, but I will come to the mountains this summer, and we will do this properly." March brought the first hints of spring, and with it, renewed energy in the classroom. The children were restless as the weather warmed, but Natalie kept them engaged with new lessons, with projects that excited their curiosity. She taught them about the wider world using the globe Ryder had given her, about geography and history and science. She read them stories of adventure and encouraged them to write their own. Several of the older students showed real academic promise, and she began working with them after school, preparing them for further education if they wanted it. In early April, Ryder sent word through Samuel that he needed to stay in the mountains longer than planned. A late snow had damaged his cabin, and he needed to make repairs, but he promised to come for her in late May, as soon as school ended. The wait felt interminable, but finally, the last day of school arrived. The children said their goodbyes, promising to be back in the fall, and Natalie closed up the schoolhouse with a sense of satisfaction. It had been a good year, a successful year, and now she was free to begin the next chapter of her life. Ryder arrived the following morning, leading 2 horses his own and a gentle mare for her. "Thought you might like your own horse," he said. "Her name is Daisy. She is patient and steady, good for a new rider." Natalie had never ridden much, but with Ryder's patient instruction over the next few days, she learned quickly. When they finally set out for the mountains, she felt confident in the saddle, excited for the adventure ahead. The journey took 2 days, traveling northwest from Council Bluffs into the rolling hills that gradually gave way to more rugged terrain. Ryder showed her how to read the landscape, pointing out animal tracks and edible plants. They camped the first night under the stars, and Natalie finally understood what he had meant about the silence and beauty of the wilderness. The sky was a vast black canvas scattered with more stars than she had imagined existed, so bright they cast shadows. The only sounds were the crackling of their fire and the occasional call of a night bird. "It is magnificent," she breathed, lying on her bedroll and staring upward. "I had no idea." This is just the beginning, Ryder said from his own bedroll, a respectful distance away. Wait until you see the mountains proper. The next day, they climbed higher into genuine mountain country. Tall pines surrounded them, and the air grew cooler, fresher. They saw a deer, a black bear in the distance, an eagle soaring overhead. Late in the afternoon, they crested a ridge, and Ryder pointed. There, that is home. His cabin sat in a small valley, protected on 3 sides by rising slopes. It was larger than she expected, built of sturdy logs with a stone chimney. Nearby was a lean-to for the horses and a small shed for supplies. A creek ran through the valley, its water crystal clear. Wildflowers dotted the meadow around the cabin. Ryder, it is beautiful, she said honestly. I had imagined something much more primitive. He looked pleased. I've been working on it for years. It started small, but I kept adding to it, made it as comfortable as I could. Inside, the cabin was surprisingly spacious. One large main room served as kitchen and living area, with a fireplace dominating one wall. There was a sleeping loft reached by a ladder and a separate small bedroom on the ground floor. The furniture was simple but well made: a table and chairs, a large bed with a thick mattress, shelves for supplies. Furs covered the floor and the bed, providing warmth and softness. Windows on 2 walls let in plenty of light. You made all of this? Natalie asked, running her hand over the smooth table surface. Over time. I am not a master carpenter, but I can make what I need. He set down her bag. You can have the bedroom. I will sleep in the loft. Ryder, you do not have to. Yes, I do. Not because I do not want to be near you, but because I want to do this right. I want you to be comfortable and feel safe here. He crossed to her, taking her hands. This summer is about you learning if you can be happy in this place, in this life. I do not want you to feel any pressure, so we take our time and we figure this out together. His consideration only made her love him more. The summer that followed was like something from a dream. Ryder taught her about wilderness living, how to identify plants, how to fish in the creek, how to preserve food. They explored the surrounding mountains, hiking to breathtaking vistas. He showed her his trap lines and explained how he tracked animals. She learned to cook over an open fire, to chop wood, to predict weather by watching the sky. But it was not just about survival skills. They spent long evenings talking by the fire, reading aloud from the books she had brought, making plans for the future. Ryder carved beautiful small sculptures from wood animals, birds, even a tiny replica of the schoolhouse while she sewed or wrote in her journal. They laughed more than she had ever laughed in her life. They took long walks and longer rides, exploring valleys and ridges, discovering hidden waterfalls and meadows carpeted with wildflowers. And slowly, carefully, their physical relationship deepened. Stolen kisses became longer embraces. Holding hands while they walked became falling asleep in each other's arms. By midsummer, Ryder had moved down from the loft and Natalie had moved into his bed. Their lovemaking was tender and passionate, a physical expression of the deep emotional bond they had built. One evening in late July, as they sat watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, Ryder turned to her. Are you happy here? Happier than I have ever been, she answered honestly. Could you see yourself dividing your time between here and Council Bluffs, spending summers here, the rest of the year teaching? I can see it. More than that, I want it. I love teaching, and I cannot imagine giving it up. But I love this too, the peace, the beauty, the simplicity. I love being with you, wherever that is, and I think splitting our time could work. You could trap in the winter when I am teaching, come to town regularly so we can be together. Then when school ends, we come here. Together. That sounds perfect to me. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Then I have a question to ask properly. Inside the box was a simple gold ring with a small, perfect sapphire. Natalie Jensen, will you marry me? Will you be my wife? Share my life? Let me spend the rest of my days loving you and supporting you and making sure you never face any challenge alone? Yes, she said, tears streaming down her face. Yes, absolutely yes. He slipped the ring on her finger, then pulled her into a kiss that was full of promise and joy and the certainty of forever. They were married in September in the small church in Council Bluffs. Natalie's students filled the pews along with the friends she had made in town. Samuel from the mercantile stood up as Ryder's best man. Mrs. Howard and Mary helped Natalie prepare, fussing over her hair and the beautiful dress she had sewn from fabric Ryder had given her cream-colored silk with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. When Ryder saw her walking down the aisle, his expression took her breath away. This rough, strong mountain man looked at her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. Their vows were simple but heartfelt. They promised to love and cherish, to support each other's dreams, to build a life together that honored both their needs. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the church erupted in applause and cheering. The reception was held at the cafe, with food and music and dancing. Ryder looked distinctly uncomfortable, surrounded by so many people, but he smiled and thanked everyone who offered congratulations. When they finally managed to slip away, heading to Natalie's small house, now their house when they were in town, he swept her up in his arms. "Alone at last," he said, carrying her over the threshold. That night, they made love as husband and wife, and it felt like the culmination of everything they had built together, the trust, the understanding, the deep and abiding love. The next 2 years established the rhythm of their life together. During the school year, they lived in Council Bluffs. Natalie taught her students while Ryder trapped in the mountains, but he came to town regularly, never letting more than 2 weeks pass without seeing her. He expanded their house in town, adding a proper bedroom and a small sitting room. He helped her with school projects, building desks when the old ones fell apart, repairing the schoolhouse roof after a storm. In the summers, they went to the mountains. Those months were precious, a time when they could focus entirely on each other. They explored new territories, took long pack trips, spent lazy afternoons fishing or reading. Natalie learned to love the wilderness as much as Ryder did, finding her own kind of peace in the vast silences and stunning beauty. In the fall of their second year of marriage, Natalie discovered she was pregnant. The news filled them both with joy and a touch of anxiety. How would they manage a child with their divided life? "We will figure it out," Ryder said, his large hand resting gently on her still flat stomach. "Maybe we spend more time in town the first few years, until the child is old enough for the mountains, or maybe we bring a baby to the mountains. Plenty of trappers have families. We will do what is best for our child." "Our child," Natalie repeated, marveling at the words. "We are going to be parents." "You are going to be an amazing mother," Ryder said with certainty. "You already mother half the children in Council Bluffs with how much you care about them." Their son was born in May of 1871, a healthy baby with Ryder's gray eyes and Natalie's dark hair. They named him Samuel Robert, after the mercantile clerk who had helped bring them together and after Ryder's father. Samuel was a quiet baby, seeming content whether in their townhouse or, later that summer, in the cabin in the mountains. Natalie had worried about teaching with a baby, but the community rallied around her. Mrs. Howard offered to watch Samuel during school hours, delighted to have a baby to fuss over. The arrangement worked well, and Natalie was able to continue her teaching while still being able to nurse and care for her son. In the mountains, Ryder proved to be a devoted father. He carved tiny toys for Samuel, carried him on his chest in a sling Natalie made, sang to him in his rough voice. Watching her strong, capable husband be so gentle with their baby filled Natalie's heart to overflowing. 2 years later, they welcomed a daughter, Grace Eleanor, named after both their mothers. Grace was a spirited child from the start, always moving, always curious. She adored her older brother and followed him everywhere. The cabin in the mountains rang with children's laughter, and their house in town was filled with the cheerful chaos of a growing family. As the children grew, they spent winters in Council Bluffs attending school, taught by their mother and other teachers as they got older, and summers in the mountains learning wilderness skills from their father. They became fluent in both worlds, as comfortable tracking deer as they were reading books, as skilled with a fishing line as with a pen. Natalie continued teaching for 15 years, until the school board finally forced her to retire at 40, claiming it was not appropriate for a woman her age to be teaching. She was furious at the injustice, but chose not to fight it. Instead, she and Ryder opened a small lending library in Council Bluffs, using books donated from all over the region. It became a gathering place for the community, and Natalie found fulfillment in connecting people with books and knowledge in a new way. Samuel grew into a young man as strong and capable as his father, choosing to become a hunting guide, taking wealthy men from back east on trips into the wilderness. Grace became a teacher herself, taking over her mother's old position at the school and bringing the same passion and dedication to it. In their later years, Ryder and Natalie spent more time in the mountains, letting the peace and quiet soothe aging bones. They would sit on the porch of the cabin they had expanded over the years, watching the sun set over the peaks, holding hands like young lovers. "Do you ever regret it?" Ryder asked one evening when they were both in their 60s. "Leaving Philadelphia, coming west, marrying a rough mountain man instead of someone refined and civilized?" Natalie laughed. "Not for a single moment. You gave me a life I never could have imagined, adventure, purpose, a family I love with all my heart. You saw me when I was at my lowest and lifted me up. You have been lifting me up ever since." "You did the same for me," he said quietly. "I did not even know I was lonely until I met you. I thought solitude was enough, but you showed me that connection, love, family that is what makes life worth living. You changed everything for me." "We changed each other," she corrected. "That is what love does. It transforms us into better versions of ourselves." They had 37 years together before Ryder passed quietly in his sleep at 72, still strong and active until nearly the end. Natalie mourned him deeply, but also celebrated the incredible life they had built together. She lived another 8 years, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, all of them benefiting from the love story that had started with a freight company's mistake and a mountain man's generosity. When she passed at 80, her family found a letter she had written to be read after her death. In it, she reflected on her life and the remarkable journey from a struggling young teacher with nothing to her name to a woman rich in love, family, and purpose. "I lost everything once," she wrote, "material possessions I had worked hard to acquire, and in losing them, I found something far more valuable. Ryder replaced what I had lost, and then some, not just with fabric and books and supplies, but with love, with partnership, with a life beyond anything I had dreamed possible. He taught me that true wealth is not what you own, but who you love, and who loves you in return. He showed me that home is not a place, but a person, and that family is what you build together through dedication and care. If I could go back and change anything, if I could prevent the freight company from losing my belongings, I would not. Because that loss led me to the greatest gain of my life. It led me to Ryder, to our children, to this beautiful, complex, challenging, wonderful life. And I would not trade it for anything in the world." The letter was passed down through generations, a testament to a love story that began with loss and ended with abundance, that started with a mountain man's simple act of kindness and grew into a legacy that touched dozens of lives. It reminded them all that sometimes the worst things that happen to us lead us to exactly where we are meant to be, that generosity and compassion can change the world, and that true love, the kind that sees you clearly and chooses you anyway, is worth any sacrifice and any weight. In Council Bluffs, the lending library Natalie and Ryder founded still stands, now a historical landmark. The schoolhouse where she taught has been preserved, with a plaque honoring her contributions to education in the region. In the mountains, the cabin they built together has become a family retreat, where their descendants still gather each summer to reconnect with the wilderness and with the love story that started it all. And if you visit that cabin on a quiet summer evening, the locals will tell you that sometimes you can still feel their presence, a rough mountain man with a heart of gold, and a determined teacher who saw past the surface to the soul beneath, two people who proved that love can bloom in the most unlikely circumstances, and that sometimes losing everything is the first step to gaining it all.